George, 0 for 4 from the floor, gets through the lane. Beautiful job splitting the defenders for his first bucket.
Paul George for 2.
Working around to Batum. George gets past Porzingis into the paint. It goes for Paul George.
More about growth. He's in his second year. He's already one of the top 5 players in this league. You know, if you ask me, you see Paul George.
Point Dallas lead. Here's George for 3. Splash! Paul George really stepping up here in the second.
Drive by Tim Hardaway Jr., but like great decision by Luka. Once you've got that double team, you've done your decision.
First step, and Kleber was gone. To Euro. Paul George gets to the hole. Clippers. Rondo. The back door's open, and Paul George finds it. Timeout, Dallas. Still only 25 in his fifth season. Break it off, and the foul. Oh, no. That's not fair either. Hold up. Paul George. And how about the deflection? The claw got his hand up there. Paul George will take care of it on the hammer. But still, Luka's got 26. And going after another triple-double, Paul George. Yeah, more, but Luka's got 35. Hardaway Jr. 25. And Paul George on the elbow fills it up. Kawhi back on the floor. And this guy needs to fill it up, and he does. Paul George with a triple.
Then from behind the arc in the series, finally the Clippers on the board. 2. 9 straight points here by the Clippers. Paul George makes it 11 in a row, and they got it down to single digits. Again, this is coming here, this run with Luka Doncic on the bench. Paul George's 3, good, and he missed the shot. Clippers on the drive. It's Paul George in LA.
So, you know, these are opportunities for the Clippers to get going.
They have the lead. Paul George with his second three-pointer. And he's got championship experience in college. Won 2 titles at Villanova. George takes it to the rim this time. And Paul George starts.
Wide open 3 off a made layup. And that's what just happened there.
Clippers come right back. Clippers trying to avoid an 0-3 hole. Paul George again.
Okay.
Overall pick. 3rd of round 2. Doncic, the 3rd pick in round 1 by Atlanta, and then traded as Paul George hits the short jumper.
Luka trying to stay with him. Well played defensively. George with 6 to shoot. The spin, the leader, and puts it down. With Paul George. George, the crossover into the 3, puts it down. It's the Clippers, their first on the axe for the Mavericks. Unable to put the putback into the cup. George, that's a 3.
2. New shot clock with which to work. And outside George for 3. It's Kawhi Leonard 0-3 so far. Paul George 3. Game 4, 15 minutes, 12 points off the bench, had 6 rebounds. So they start him tonight. 3, George coming again. He's on the court. But certainly you can see how his teammates just adore him. He is playing great ball here in this game. Leaning in, lunging for their team with the Clippers. More than capable of chipping away here, but what an end to that 3rd quarter. Look at Luka Doncic. 7 rebounds. It's a 10-2 Clipper run. Making it now, approaching 6 to play. Oh, it's Presley in there with it. 40% shooting for the Clippers inside. Forcing it. Oh, got it. Took it to Morris.
Shot clock down to 8. Morris flips it out to George. Good open look for 3 for Paul George. Knocks it down.
It's spectacular. Great ball on this Mavericks.
Leonard to George. George the finish. George, nice Euro step, left-handed off the glass. That's a pretty move.
Hands and hope he misses a few.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Back up to you, Mike.
throws the jump. George brings it back out. Fires away. It's good. Three-pointer for Paul George on the drop.
Largest lead has been 6. Clippers had that briefly. Paul George, a corner three. That's good. But he's strong, guarding Kawhi Leonard. The double team. George steps into a three. It's good. Paul George from downtown.
George using the screen. The pull-up jump goes down for Paul to give it up. Kennard from the corner. It doesn't go. Rebound kept alive by Rondo. George, one dribble in a J. Yes, sir.
That's a good look at it right there, Mark.
Easy transition bucket, and Paul George on the sheet.
And a big-time shot from Joe Ingles.
Ends a 9-0 run. Paul George lost his balance. Got it. Wow. Count it. PG. A little over a minute to go. George with in-and-out dribble. Puts it up. Whistle. Count it. PG. Incredibly competitive. Capable of that extra gear. We've seen it tonight. George with a late three. Cross court to Morris. One more to George, and he slams it home. Royce O'Neal on defense. George steps back and drills it. This ball came right back to his arms. And Paul George knocks down the jumper. George, 9 on the shot clock. Gets into the paint all the way to the cup for the layup. Just leading by 10. George for three. Got it! Paul George.
He said, if my basketball instincts tell me to take lots of threes, I'm going to do it.
That jumper is splashy. Undrafted out of Baylor and played overseas in 3 different countries. Paul George maneuvering his way to the bucket, guarded by Bogdanovich. Shot clock down to 5. George, a tough contested three. Oh! Wet! George stops behind the three-point line and knocks down another one. Friends off the court as well. George with a crossover. Inside, off glass! Over the...
Clippers blew the game wide open in the fourth quarter. George, good-looking delivery from Paul George.
Defense. They have not defended well on this court thus far.
Paul George, got him! A three.
The fact that they got a defensive stop and an attack in transition creates a good look, and Paul George continues to knock.
George Leonard on the floor for LA. George, big finish, and the foul. Shot clock winding down. George takes it hard to the hole. PG 13. Morris gives it up. George. Count it for three.
The staff recognizing we've got to play earlier in the shot clock.
Paul George. This was a celebration early. Paul George got a three.
That was a huge fast
9 extended run. George weaving through. Bank shot goes for PG-13.
I tell you what, Paul George is
Clippers spread here. George, the handles, the fadeaway. Oh yeah.
defender that the Clippers don't have. Should be more opportunities to attack.
Splitting defenders. PG-13 with a tough bucket. The 44. George trying to take it at Gobert. Fade away. Oh, that is silky smooth from PG-13. George sizing up O'Neal. The drive inside for two and a foul. The strength of Paul George. Made more this season. George, fade, money.
Game offensively.
After the Mitchell miss, George sees an opening, finishes with the offhand. PG-13 with a sweet move. George once again, Bogdanovich. Step back three, splash for Paul George. Isolation for George. George is fouled, and he's got it. Wow. Royce O'Neal put the hand out.
There, the relationship evolved. Jordan says it's Ty who taught him all the routines he needed, how things are different in the playoffs. Ty, of course, maybe regret.
Range. He's hit a lot of long ones. Bad pass and stolen by Gobert, who turns it right back over. And Paul George, an easy bucket. Paul George, a three-pointer. That's good. 21 for George. George guarded by Clarkson. Rises up high. Arcing shot is good. 23 points, 8 rebounds, and 7 assists for Paul George. Paul George with Mitchell on him. Gobert lurking. Step back, two-pointer. It's good. A chance of PLA started when the Clippers came out for their open warm-ups. Paul George gets inside on the finish.
More active, more athletic, more nimble. A second shot and then a tip out already.
Paul George, quick turnaround. After an emotional and tough series against Utah from Friday night to Sunday. Is applied to the defense. The Tobin George play catch. George sets and fires. Paul George from there. Put a tattoo of it on his body. He is marching towards those orders. George trying to draw some contact. Tough shot. Phoenix is shooting 63% for the game. Paul George starting to feel it. Nails another three. Paul George with nothing besides Booker, who had 16 consecutive points for his team. George step back three-pointer. And Paul George. Suns, by the way, only 3 of their 16 field goal attempts are from 3. Paul George this time gets down low. George stops. This time connects.
That's tremendous footwork.
Mario Saric with 7 points, couple of assists, and 6 minutes off the bench. A huge impact as Paul George gets inside. Hard. Moore is on George. Little fake. Drops it. Paul George now with 16. Coming off the down screen of 8. Just his second field goal. George looks to answer. That's good. Paul George drills his first three-pointer. Comes the other way. Here comes Paul George. Gets inside. Lamb. He banks it home. And the Clippers take the lead. Timeout Phoenix.
There'll be no shot blocking at the rim.
George jumper. Got it. Paul George drills another.
That Beverly, put the fall, rebounding, defending, knocking down shots.
Paul George knocks down the shot. Payne had 29 points in game 2. George turns, shoots, and scores.
3% and 3 for 16 from 3.
And they're still with the lead as Paul George gets that one to fall. George drives into traffic, pulls up, shot's good. And the Clippers regain the lead. Back-to-back buckets for Paul George. Phoenix has a foul to give. George drives, goes inside for the slam with 2.9 remaining. The series in the first 2 games, 22 of 29. That shot's good from Paul George. Boy, the Clippers love this.
An elite offensive weapon.
They did it in game 2 as well. Paul George drives inside, up and under, banks it home.
Payne, will he be the backup point guard to Paul?
Paul George nails the three-pointer. Paul George gets it off in time. Oh, he banks it in! It's good! Paul George at the buzzer!
That time he got the mid-range jumper.
This is the largest lead of the series by either team so far through the first 3+ games. George knocks it down. Take that sent from the field. They have not scored now in 6 minutes. George struggling with his dribble. Fires away and knocks. Count, obviously the foul came. Crowder picked up the second on George. Hard to hear the whistles. Plays pretty loud right now. That's his first shot without the mask. George looking to draw a foul. Drills it. And this building. Booker guarding George. Paul George now with 18 points.